You mentioned discretion in environmental enforcement, and obviously that plays a huge role. I'm wondering whether what you meant by that is discretion in using existing authorities, sort of, and we might say like within the lines, and just directing it's sort of more conventional prosecutions or enforcement actions towards particular communities. So using conventional authorities in new places, or are you thinking about discretion in terms of a broader and perhaps more creative reading of conventional authorities? So where do you see this discretion going? And I'm not sure if my question is clear, but if you understand it, you could answer it.
I do. Thank you, Judge. I think I initially saw it in terms of sort of discretion in terms of using existing authority. Not to say that we might not get to a place as sort of we evolve and this administration evolves, where you're sort of testing new and creative approaches to existing authority. But I think within existing authority, there's the idea, when I listen to sort of environmental justice activists sort of talk about what they're looking for, it really is just wanting to be considered, the impacts that they're experiencing, the communities that they live in, even just under existing law. And I know, and I think many of us who've worked in government know that even the path that it takes for there to be if you're in environmental enforcement, or you're in environmental crimes, the path that it takes to get sort of folders on your desk of potential cases, there's a lot of discretion involved in sort of who chose what, to focus where and what information was available and what resonated with you when you saw, an agent when they saw it, or a regulatory attorney when they saw it. There's lots of steps along the way before you get to the stage that, there's a recommendation for enforcement that's brought at the Department of Justice. And so I'm thinking really just in terms of use of existing laws, but perhaps through some of the guidance that's issued and some of the directives around thinking about environmental justice as being more intentional about thinking about what was that path, what might not have been considered, how might you change your sort of how might those procedures change so that you're sort of viewing more broadly or considering more broadly communities or impacts that you wouldn't otherwise have, but that are certainly already sort of recognized within the law.
Do you think, in your experience as a prosecutor and as an environmental litigator, what do you think have been the roadblocks to the kind of enforcement that environmental communities might want to see, communities adversely affected by environmental concerns?
I think some of it just comes down to, just having, in order to make an effective environmental claim, I think sometimes you just have to have resources, right? You have to be able to articulate. You may perceive that you are experiencing adverse effects from the facility that's, across the street from you, or you may, believe that those are issues, but you have to have more than that in order to bring a case. And so I think some of it is a lack of resources by these community groups and an inability to sort of get adequate legal representation. And I think some of the some of the money that's going to be funneled to these groups may shift that. But I also think it's even when you do that, and once it sort of comes through the system within EPA or the other agencies, reaching all the way up to Justice Department, for instance, on the criminal side, I think that, how a lot of whether you bring a criminal case as a prosecutor has to do with the law, but also how outraged are you? How much does it bother you? How concerned are you about the actions? And you have a lot of discretion within that, right? You're not compelled to bring a case. And whether you choose to either decline that case, or, you know, on the criminal side, decline that case or plead that case to something lesser. A lot of that just has to do with kind of your own background and your thinking, and you're not doing it with malice. But perhaps part of being more intentional and asking agencies to think more about this means that you'll think perhaps a little differently about where you might be inclined to decline a case, and perhaps you take a second look. Or you know, when an agent brings you a file, perhaps you ask, you know, sort of what didn't make it into the file. You know, on the criminal side anyway, that's just sort of maybe an example.